when did you know that you wanted to be a scientist?
I knew at a very early age. I had a brother 11 years older than I was, and a sister 10 years older. So they really took me in hand. And my brother liked science a lot and had chemistry sets and all sorts of stuff, which I immediately took to. I loved it. And so even at a very, very young age, 4 or 5, I was playing around with that. I liked biology. I liked animals. I knew I was going to be a scientist.
And so as you got a little bit older, was there influences as you got into high school?
So I went to a high school in New York called the Bronx High School of Science. It's a very well-known high school because it specializes in science, has more Nobel Prize winners than most universities, and has always, been very renowned school for doing science. And so I went to that high school and learned science. And I was committed. I really was. I loved it.
Was there something special about chemistry, or were there a lot of things?
It was a lot of things. I actually liked biology more than chemistry in the beginning, but biology, when I was, 1955, when I was getting ready to go to college, biology was identifying organisms and stuff. All the molecular biochemistry and stuff hadn't developed yet. DNA was just there. So I didn't really know. I was pretty naive about what was there. And chemistry, though, I liked chemistry too. It was, it fit my style.
And so when you had this interest from so young, and now you're getting an education that's, putting the pieces together. We talk a lot within the organization, actually, even with my own kids, about, so how do you then, how do you plan your future? What looks to become to you your dream job? What was that for you?
Well, so it wasn't so easy for me on that. I mean, the economic times when I was in college were not so hot. The war had ended, people were coming back. And so I wasn't clear. So in fact, before I ever went to graduate school, I took a job with General Chemical Company, which is now, I think, a branch of Allied Chemical in Morristown, New Jersey, and thought actually I would have a career in industry, that I liked doing industrial research. And that was fine. But I realized very quickly as I was doing that you were limited in your ability to go on and do things you really wanted to do. And I had a lot of ideas of things I'd like to try. So I realized I at least had to go to graduate school and get a PhD degree before I went on to industry. And then while I was in graduate school, I understood better and better the advantages of an academic career and doing your own research and being your own boss. That was a dream job, right? To do what you wanted to do.
Yeah. So let's talk about the formal education and Jeffrey Wilkinson at Harvard University. Tell us about him and your experience there.
Okay, so I opted after this time in industry to apply to a few different schools. Harvard was one, and I was fortunate enough to get in. And the idea at the time was that as soon as you arrived, you had to pick someone. You didn't have to pick them permanently, but you had to go into the lab and start doing research with some person. And so I looked at, there were no webs to look at the time, but I looked at the records of people and what they were doing. And Jeff Wilkinson, who was a young Englishman, had joined the faculty about 5 years before, roughly. I thought was doing fascinating work. It was the start of organometallic chemistry. He had synthesized ferrocene. And so I thought that was really interesting stuff, and so I would work with him, at least in this first course. Usually if you were happy with that, then you made a commitment to do your whole career there. So I started working with him, and I was reasonably happy. I didn't like doing synthesis in a glove box, but it was okay. It was okay.
Well, tell us more about what that means. So what were you working on with him?
I was working on organometallic compounds. I made chromium tricarbonyl cyclopentadiene methyl I think that was the one. And so I synthesized that for the first time. And others, there was another student, Dave Lamal, made the molybdenum one, and somebody had made the tungsten one. And so we had completed the whole set. And I thought that was interesting and fun, looked at their properties. But what happened was Wilkinson didn't get tenure at Harvard, even though he was doing this, what I thought was brilliant work. And of course, eventually won the Nobel Prize for that work. So I always figured I could judge people a hell of a lot better than the Harvard faculty.
I guess so.
But he left. He was really angry, I remember that, and left almost instantaneously. Went to Imperial College and spent the rest of his career there. And so I was then in a position to find another advisor. This was now second semester. And so I started considering the other possibilities. And I always liked electrochemistry. The experiment I liked best when I was an undergraduate was polarography, where you were doing electrochemistry with a dropping mercury electrode. Nobody knows about it anymore, but it was standard technique at the time. And James Lingane, JJ, was doing electrochemistry, some polarography, but other things as well. And so I thought I'd join that group and see how that was. And I loved that. I took to electrochemistry like a fish to water, and you know, that was just perfect for me.
You got involved in J.J. Lingane's group, shift to electrochemistry, analytical chemistry, and you said it really grabbed you. And could you tell us more about why what grabbed you more?
Well, the idea of combining chemistry, which is limited. I mean, chemistry is a great field, but in fact, to me, you're always dealing with chemical energy. That's it, with the chemicals that you have around, sort of. And by combining it with electricity, totally different form of energy, you could do all sorts of things. I realized that right away. Now you removed a barrier in just being in chemistry, so electrochemistry really changed chemistry. I don't think enough people appreciate that electrochemistry made available materials, sodium, potassium, chlorine, fluorine, that you couldn't make otherwise. They just weren't there. And so it increased the scope of chemistry terrifically. And so I realized that, and that was always, in fact, a theme of mine throughout my career, to put more and more into this pot and see what we could do.
After you leave Lingane's group, what's next for you?
Well, I should mention in Lingane's group that he had a few, I was the fourth graduate student to join the group at the time that it was there, but the other included Fred Anson, who also became a top electrochemist and was a very good advisor to me. He was a year ahead of me, what helped a lot. And I should also mention, I got my PhD in 3 years, but during the last year of my PhD, a new instructor joined the faculty named David Geske. And though he's not well known, Geske was a really brilliant chemist. And I worked with him. So Lingane gave us a lot of free rein to do whatever we liked. And so I worked a lot with Geske, and I always kind of consider that my last year of graduate school was overlapping with a postdoc with Geske, and he taught me a lot, and was a very good. He later went to Cornell and had a good career, but didn't get tenure. So if you look at all the really good instructors in analytical chemistry, it was the same problem. Barry Miller, Larry Faulkner were all instructors and didn't get tenure at Harvard.
Right. So they, well, in Barry's case, went to the Invention Factory at
he went to Bell Labs.
Bell Laboratories.
Larry went to Illinois. I mean, so, but you know, they all deserved it.
Yeah.
And Geske didn't get it.
We're through at Harvard,
Okay,
and now.
So now I knew I wanted an academic job. I had looked a little bit in industry, but I knew I wanted an academic job because I understood better the system. And so I sent in applications to a number of places. And within a week, though, Norman Hackerman, who was chairman of the Department of Chemistry at the University of Texas in Austin, called me up. I still remember I had to run over to a different building to get the long-distance phone. I could get long-distance calls. I hadn't talked to Hackerman, and Hackerman said, I'm offering you a job, instructor, $5,200 a year, which was a lot for me at the time. You want to come to Texas? And so I said, well, you know, I've never been to Austin and never been to Texas, actually. So I don't know what it's like, and you don't know me. Don't you want me to come down and give a seminar, look around?
Yeah.
He said, no. No, you don't want to pay my airfare. So Hackerman said, no, you know, just, you have a week. Let me know in a week whether you're going to join us or not join us.
That sounds like him, but what did he know about you? Did he know from some publications? Did he know Lingane? I mean, what?
He probably knew Lingane, and I don't know, I sent him some stuff, and he could probably find out about me.
And
he thought there was no risk. I mean, you know, in those days, you would go to a university. It's not like now you get $1 million to build equipment, get equipment and stuff, you know. I came down, I asked Hackerman, as a matter of fact, maybe in a second phone call when I thought I was going to go there, do you have it, you know, do I get any money for equipment? And he said, yeah, I'll give you $5,000, and if you don't spend it all, that's even better. So it was not much. What risk were they taking with me?
Yeah.
And I felt the same way, though. I felt, you know, I would go down. I thought Texas was cowboys, and
Right.
you know, it was a different world, a new frontier. I really had that image of it, and so I said, that's really great. You know, I try something totally new.
Well, a New York guy educated at Harvard, that's a big change.
That's right.
And what was it like when you got to University of Texas?
It was very nice. So Austin was a very nice city, much nicer than it is now, where it's grown 6 times at least from what it was then. And the university is also much smaller, but nice. It was a good place, but not very. It wasn't a really great university.
And what was going on in the chemistry department? That was
Chemistry department. Well, I mean, I think the change was that Hackerman had become chair of the chemistry department shortly before I got there. And he had a real vision and a real understanding of what it was going to take to change the culture. There was a cultural change going on. It was a good teaching university. Research was mediocre. And he was going to change that, and he did.
But he wasn't president when you arrived, or was he?
Oh, he wasn't president. He was
Right,
chairman of
right,
the chemistry
okay,
department,
okay.
and then went through vice president for research and several things before he became president.
How did you go about establishing your group at the University of Texas?
Well, it was actually pretty hard, because in those days, again, in the cultural change, the senior professors really wanted the graduate students, the best, certainly the best graduate students. They wanted all the graduate students. So I didn't get a graduate student for 2 or 3 years. So I was doing research myself. I didn't really mind that too much. I liked to do research. Finally, I got some research support. I didn't know anything about research support. Lingane never got $1 from the federal government. You know, we paid our own way.
Jeez.
And so I didn't really know anything about research support. There was the Welsh Foundation, but that took a little while before they would give you money. But it was much easier in those days to get funding. The National Science Foundation was pretty new. The DOD agencies were pretty new. And so they, in fact, would call you up and say, you know, why don't you put in a proposal? And they, you know, it was much easier to get funding.
But easier from this because it was electrochemistry thing that was really interesting to them, or just?
Well, that was certainly interesting, but I think more it's just they just had a lot of money. You know, the possibilities were very high, and so they could identify people that they thought were worth putting the money on.
And so your lab's changed a little bit over the years, has it?
Oh, yeah, yeah. So then I finally got one graduate student who had not made it among the organic chemists, and he was very good. I had a very good relationship with him.
Is a name we know?
Jaspal Mayel, his name was. Jaspal was my first student. Later went on to a career at the Union Carbide. He's now retired. All my early students are retired. Foolish.
Well, so I'd like to talk more about the names. I've been influenced by the names, the people that have gone through your lab. Let's start with Giannoletti. Since I was talking to her last night.
Well, I've had a lot of, and I was very fortunate to have a lot of very good students. And I enjoy working with students. I mean, I think that's the most important thing I ever did. And so, yeah, so people who've come through my lab, Henry White, Larry Faulkner, Dick Crooks, Giannoletti. I hate to limit them because most of them are very good.
Well, and she, actually what I was sort of alluding to is that, so Henry White was in her class, Charles Martin, some of the people that I'm familiar with in ECS that I think are very accomplished, and the influence of the other students really can be quite influential on the success and the later years as people move on.
No, that's right. So there's a kind of chemistry that develops in a group. And it can be very good chemistry, or it can be not so good chemistry. But at that time, that era, the earlier era, there was an earlier era with Larry Faulkner and others, Joe Malloy.
Joe Malloy, yeah.
That was a very good group, and that was the development of ECL. Actually, came from electrogenerated chemiluminescence, came from that era, and then the era when Henry and Crooks and these guys were there was the era of developing polymer electrochemistry and the start of photoelectrochemistry. Paul Cole, another guy, helped in the development of photoelectrochemistry.
It may be because I know so many of the people that you taught, but I have this impression that as far as a teacher in the society and in the era that I've been involved, you're recognized as the greatest teacher, and I think it is part because you're able to develop this chemistry between, if you will, chemistry, right, between the students that you have that sort of take it to another level. Is that something you consciously do? You look for certain characteristics in a student that applies. How does that happen? Because that doesn't just happen. I think you have to be orchestrating that to some extent.
Well, I don't really. I mean, I don't intentionally orchestrate anything. I just do what I think comes naturally. I think you naturally find out the abilities of students and their special talents and their special characteristics, and you have to bend their research projects and the way you handle them to their own personalities. That's okay. And then the rest just either develops or doesn't develop. I mean, even at that time, there was some bad chemistry in the group, I'll tell you.
Oh, okay.
I would tell you, for the record, however.
Well, got to have a little of that maybe to keep it interesting. Let's talk a little bit about your research. Electrochemiluminescence is one of the hallmarks of your career. So tell us about that. Explain how you got involved and how it's impacted society, which is something.
Right. Well, so we were working on organic electrochemistry, which was in a very developing stage when I came there. And it was, of course, a very mature area. It goes back to Fritz Haber. And there were a lot of organic electrochemists. People in the society were Sherlock Swan and Wozenek and others. But I didn't think, truthfully, that there was a real deep understanding of what was going on. And the advantage I had was that things like molecular orbital theory were developing right at that time. And we could start to understand better what happens, what reduction really means. You put an electron onto the molecule and it goes into an orbital. And, why do some look like they're 2 electrons and 4 electrons and protons? And Geschke had taught me that if you went into a non-aqueous solvent like acetonitrile, Geschke was one of the first to use acetonitrile as a solvent for electrochemistry, that now you could cut out a lot of the side reactions like reactions with water or protons. And so we were doing a lot of that and showing that, in fact, all these electrode reactions were 1 electron reactions. They weren't 2 electrons, they weren't 2 electrons and 2 protons. They were just 1 electron reactions. You either pushed an electron, it was very simple. You either pushed an electron in and you could tell what the potential would be, or you pulled an electron out. So you were making anion radicals and cation radicals. And then we started thinking, what if you let those two guys react with each other? Because there's a fair amount of energy stored in both of them now, and light comes out. Now, there are other people who did this at just about the same time, and in fact, the first publication in ECL was by Dave Hercules. He was an MIT student. I forget where he was at the time he did that. Wanting out of college, maybe. And then there were a couple of people at Bell Labs. Actually, my roommate, the second year I was at Harvard, was working on that, coincidentally, at Bell Labs. But it also now taught me something, that now you could take the electricity and the chemistry mix, that is electrochemistry, and add light out, or maybe light in. And so now we have three forms of energy we could intermix: light, electricity, and chemistry. And so all of a sudden it opened another vista for me. Now, in answer to your question, what happened with ECL? So it was really fun. That was really nice to be able to make light come out of systems, different colors. It was beautiful. Everything was working well. Faulkner was working on this, show there were magnetic field effects on the light. You could affect the light by magnetic fields. But I was fundamentally, in fact, from Harvard, as you mentioned, an analytical chemist. I always wanted to see analytical applications of this. And we didn't see how you could possibly use ECL, which was in very dry, oxygen-free, non-aqueous solvents, as any kind of a practical analytical technique for things. And so then we pushed for about 10 years to see if we could get ECL in water, which was a really big goal for us, and to see if we could do it under conditions that would make a practical analytical technique. And I don't know how much detail you want in that, but I mean, the key issue there was to find a luminescent material that was soluble in water. And this was RuBiPi, ruthenium trisbipyridyl, was soluble in water. Then the problem, however, was, so we could do ECL of ruthenium trisbipyridyl in acetonitrile. You couldn't easily do it in water because water doesn't have the optical range that you can oxidize and reduce, right? So water has a range thermodynamically at 1.2 volts. We can stretch it to 1.8 volts. But that's still really not enough to make light. Light is 1.8 to 3 volts. And so if you just go out negative, positive, the way we were doing with non-aqueous solvents, we couldn't do it in water. We get hydrogen and oxygen. And so we had to figure out a way to do it in water. And we did. This took a long time. And the idea was to make something that you could oxidize, but which would make a reducing agent after you oxidized it. And that was called a co-reactant. And we figured out how to use co-reactants with RuBiPi, and then all of a sudden we could do ECL in water. And that was picked up by several companies. I patented that. And now it's a very, very widely used analytical technique for clinical chemistry, for viruses, for lots of different things.
That's the question I wanted you to answer more about. So virus, other things. What else? Where else is being used, valued?
Oh, for prostate-specific antigen is analyzed this way. It's very, very sensitive. I mean, the advantage of ECL is it's very selective. If you're going to tie rubrene to a molecule, ruthenium trisbipyridyl to a molecule, then you're going to only see that light coming out with that molecule. There's not a lot that'll give light coming out of a system like that. And unlike fluorescence, which is also a fairly sensitive technique, but in fluorescence you got to put light in. If you put light in, it scatters. There are other fluorescent impurities. So the sensitivity is nowhere near as good as ECL. So ECL has the advantage of being as sensitive as radioactive isotopes, which people were using, but not having to deal with radioactivity. And so it's very, very widely used now.
And you have an immense range of work. Anything else you'd like to tell us a little bit more about?
Oh, I got a lot. You want to talk about science? I love it.
Okay. How about artificial photosynthesis?
Okay, so this realization that I could take electricity, convert it to chemicals, take the chemicals and react and put light out. And I gave a lecture at the University of Wisconsin about ECL. I was all excited about it. Very pretty 35 millimeter slides. And someone was sitting in the audience who I later found out was Farrington Daniels, who was a very well-known physical chemist at the time, who was very interested in solar energy. And he said, "Oh, Bard, anybody can take electricity and make light." Edison did. He said, "What you really want to do is take light and make electricity or chemicals out of it. So have you thought about that?" And I said, "I thought about it, but I don't know how to do it. I can't see how to drive backwards the reactions we're using now." But that started us on it. We started to think about it. And slowly, again, it takes time, but you start to understand things. We started to do photoelectrochemistry. We saw you could take other things as electrodes, put light in, excite them, get chemicals, get electricity. We're still working on it. So that whole field, I think, is a great field, too. And it's the same light, electricity, chemistry mix.
And so earlier I said you have an immense range of work. How or why?
So I think part of it is in the teaching part, I think, in that if you have a reasonable sized group, you really want them to be doing a lot of different things. So even if they don't do it themselves, they learn it. Some people, like Henry White, did it also while he was there. So the more different topics you work on, the more different kind of projects, the better it is for people being educated at that time. So I think that's one of them. I think the other thing is some of the best work I've done is because I would take something from one field, physics or something, and combine it with something I knew from another field, because I have these different things. We'd combine it and get some new ideas and new results. Now, the difficulty with that, I have to admit, is one becomes a little bit of a dilettante. You can't devote the time and effort and everything to develop one field, look at have confidence that you know everything about that field because you've been in it for 40 years, And so you always have this sinking feeling in your stomach that I really don't know enough to be saying what I'm saying. But I think that's a personality. There are two different kind of personalities. One is the guy who does like that, and the other guy devotes his whole life to one problem.
So if you had to pick one, what would be the biggest technical challenge or issue
that
you encountered?
And we were successful? I mean, there are lots of things in this whole list that were totally unsuccessful.
Well, let's go with one that was successful.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I always feel what I'm doing now is the most important thing I've ever done. That's the way scientists brainwash themselves so they keep working. I mean, it really is. We think, well, this is the most important thing I'm doing, and it's really important. General public doesn't care. So I like scanning electrochemical microscopy. That's still a developing technique. I really think that's nice. We're still doing a lot of things with that. We're shrinking it down. I still like the things I talked about here on trying to look at single molecules one at a time, collisions of particles one at a time, and eventually be able to do electrochemistry of single molecules. And I think we can do it. So that's what I'm excited about now.
Okay, fair enough. In these videos, we like to really get at where the general public does give a hoot, since you mentioned it. And I think it would be valuable to share the things where you think they connect to the general public, making the world a better place, if you will. I don't want to be corny, but...
No. Well, I mean, the thing is, to connect to the public is fine, but you have to be careful to realistically connect, not to oversell, not to make promises that you can't do. So, for example, I still think that eventually photoelectrochemistry will be a solution to the energy problem, that we will take solar energy, we will make fuels, we'll make chemicals, we'll make electricity. Eventually we'll do that. it's going to take improvement of efficiencies, Turner talked about. It'll take, discoveries, but you do make discoveries. I mean, what I learned in my career is discoveries happen, You have to have faith, and then, you learn a lot. And so that connects. I mean, I think the public understands, I hope they do, that sustainable energy is really important, and that any way we can get to it. And electrochemistry is the best way, really. I mean, we can depend on fossil fuels that we dig out of the ground and we get for almost free until they're all gone, but they're going to be all gone. And also worry about the climate and what's their effect on the climate. And so at that point, I don't know what we're going to start doing. So that certainly connects. As I say, the clinical chemistry that resulted from our VCL, I think, is a good connection. I don't think people care much when they take a blood sample where it goes or how they're doing this, but that is there.
The advances, you're there. We're there. I mean, you see that happening. That's what you said.
Right.
So the other obstacles are, I guess, the obvious: the infrastructure, the petroleum-based world that we are. What do you think we can do to tear down those obstacles?
Well, it's really very hard, because I think human beings are designed to respond immediately to current ideas, current environment, So personal smoke, even though they know everybody says this is harmful, increases your probability of lung cancer, heart disease, and so on. You can tell people, even very intelligent people, that. But if it doesn't affect them immediately after smoking a cigarette, they don't care. And so you can tell people, look, all this fossil fuel we're building, all this CO2 that's building up in the air, other greenhouse gases, are going to cause terrific problems. It's only going to be when lower Manhattan or the Texas Gulf Coast is underwater
right,
that they're going to start to respond, and it's going to take a while. Then you have to build dikes and things. So people will respond too late, too late to make it an easy response.
Yeah, that's a scary thing to me. Just because the carbon's still going to be, carbon dioxide is still going to be out there. And,
That's right.
And when we respond, if we do, we will, if Manhattan's underwater, the polar cap is melted enough, our response is going to take time.
That's right, and I think people will then get really worried. They'll really see it happening, and they'll say, we have to scrub this out of the air. Now that's a much harder problem than scrubbing it out of the fuels that we were burning. But they'll go do it. And if you're going to scrub CO2 out of the air, it's going to be energy intensive. And the only energy I know that they're going to be able to use is electricity, solar generated or maybe wind generated. And so there may well be in the future big CO2 scrubbing machines, and really a concerted world effort to get rid of it. But that's very far in the future.
Any other practical significance of the work that you'd like to share?
No, I like practical stuff, and I like getting inventions and patents and stuff. And some things work, but in fact are not commercially feasible. So, for example, we had a way of taking care of waste by using light and titanium dioxide. We had a patent on it. We had a company that was, I was working with a company that was doing that, and it works like a charm. And you can scrub chemical waste without putting any chemicals in, just by sunlight and TiO2. So I was really excited about that.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
But it never was competitive. It was never competitive with a cheaper way of doing it, like absorbing it on carbon and then heating the carbon and taking a liquid waste problem and making it a gas waste problem. So, you're going to get rid of waste. The company doesn't want to spend any money on it, and so the cheapest way is going to win, not the best way. But that was a nice practical thing that didn't quite turn out.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Maybe change gears a little bit and talk about, so you've been on faculty, I forget,
57 years.
57 years. So you've seen a lot of change in science over that time. Talk about that a little bit.
In terms of the better, technology has helped stupendously. I mean, things that we couldn't imagine 57 years ago, looking at atoms, lasers, computers. You know, it just changed the technology, made possible things that would take years then to take days now. So that's really a great advantage of the way science has gone. On the other hand, I think the whole culture, the funding, has become much harder. It's become much tougher for young people to get funding, to get tenure, to be judged right. That's gotten much worse. I think the journal situation, which I know you're very interested in, I am too, has become very bad in terms of the scientist. It's just because journals have been discovered sometime in that 57-year period, when exactly, I don't know, to be a money-making enterprise, that then it proliferated beyond really reasonability, and that makes it just very hard now to deal with the literature. And that plus then side questions like open access and quality peer review. I mean, I get a paper a day to review. It's just the situation's become very impossible. I used to read pretty much, certainly the contents, and then selectively a lot of papers in a journal every week. Daily I could read one journal a day, and I could feel like I kept up with it, and it's impossible to do that now.
The issues you just put out are sort of at the heart and soul of the Electrochemical Society as a professional society, a scholarly publisher, a steward of the science, where the peer review process is fundamental to our publication program, and our publication program is fundamental to our mission. We're here to disseminate the knowledge that advances the science, and with the change that we've experienced, the competition, the subscription pricing, I could take a guess, I truly can't say that I know the influences that changed it most, but it was really around the time of the digitizing of the publications that we really began to see the commercial publishers bundling and pricing in a way that now has become so excessive, obviously.
Right. But even the societies like the American Chemical Society, that I like very much, but even they have caught on to this as terms of the income they can get out of publication. So they now proliferate the journals beyond really needed, and make the journals longer and more frequent and so on. And so even the societies have kind of caught on to the same thing.
Right.
They're much better than the commercial publishers, no question. But yeah.
The proliferation of new journals is also money motivated, because they add them to the bundles, and you have to beg the question that doesn't the scope of the existing stable of journals cover that you need a new journal for that technical area?
Yeah, I mean the difficulty is as you proliferate the journals, and now there are all these vagabond journals online, what do you fill them with? You have to fill them, so now you lower the standards. The bar of standards of what you publish has gone down, 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 and that's terrible for a reader, because it means the signal, the good stuff, to the noise, all the stuff, has gotten really small. You have to plow your way through stuff to find the good stuff, and that's a time-consuming thing. So I think the system has to change somehow, or it's just going to destroy itself. It'll revert to a system, a totally different system.
And the thing that's in the way is the money to access that information. You have to pay so much. And of course we're moving in the complete other opposite direction. We obviously didn't think that that was the right way to go, and so we're going to try and create as much, remove those obstacles as much as possible.
Yeah, I think that's important, but I think also, you know, one has to get that quality, maintain a bar, get that quality up, then people will appreciate it. I mean, all these other open access journals, you know, that are, the author has to pay. Who is going to pay? The author that's going to pay is the owner who can't publish it for free.
Right,
And so, but even if that's open access, people are not going to go look for it because they'll know I'm not going to go looking in these journals, right?
So what else do you think the Electrochemical Society could do to support our science, advance our science, support our community?
Well, I think it does a good job. I mean, I think meetings are good. The culture of meetings has changed a little bit too. In the earlier days, if you went to a meeting, you heard mostly about work that was not yet published. People were telling you what their latest results were. So in fact, you know, it was the way to get late-breaking results. And that was a very good thing about meetings. But now it's much less that. I don't know whether it's competition among people, lack of trust, but now mostly what you get are things that have been already published. I kind of know what he's going to talk about. And there may be little gems of unpublished stuff, but mostly it's not. So that's changed a little bit in the meetings. But yet, the Electrochemical Society does a very, very good job of that, always has. What makes a journal are the people who publish in it. And I think the PR has to go out to the community and explain to them why they should publish here rather than somewhere else. And I think that's important. I think a real outreach, not making any promises, you know, not, you know, diluting the effort to have good peer review and good processes, but simply to look at the people, say, come publish in our journal, and, you know, and other journals now do that, you know, they make a lot of overtures, and do that. I think that would be very, very good. I think the other problem really is the solid state. Solid state, you know, has been a really strong point in the Electrochemical Society from the beginning, and it was a very fortunate thing to put it in. But that has to be maintained. You know, I think the solid state field of electronics is maturing now, and that makes it difficult. But I think there's still, I don't really believe that, you know, we're at the end of the line or anything like that. We're hitting physics limits. It'll continue. Solid state materials, semiconductors. It's just to get more and more of the fundamental papers.
We've been talking about your experience in the change of the science and got you to these 57 years at the university. And I'd like to ask you what you think you'd still like to tackle.
Well, as I said, you know, so right now I would like to do digital chemistry. I think it's time to look at single molecules, to change the way we think about ensembles and understand things at the individual molecular level, individual particle level. So that's certainly a challenge I'd like to keep doing as long as I can.
How long is that?
I don't know. I don't know. No one knows. I don't take graduate students anymore. I have 2 graduate students, but that's the end. And I don't buy green bananas.
I knew you would say something like that. But you're showing up every day, and you seem enthusiastic as ever about the things that you are doing.
Yeah, well, you know, that's what keeps me going, I guess.
Is there anything that you're most proud of?
I'm most proud of my students. Because as I tell them, the people who I really knew as the leaders in science, electrochemistry, but other science, they never heard of. And these guys were really famous. Kolthoff. Ian Kolthoff was the most famous analytical chemist of the time, father of modern analytical chemistry. But others, you know. And that kind of fame is fleeting, that very few people can hope for a future in the textbooks from what they did, right? And so then you say, well, what then does carry on, you know, my inheritance? What is it that I'm building? And what I'm building are my students, and their students, and students after them. And they'll help keep building the edifice of science. And so that's the most important thing I do. It really is.
But Kolthoff probably has students out there, no?
Sure. Lingane was a student of Kolthoff.
Oh, there you go.
So he's a grandfather.
So that's how you build your legacy through the students. So how do you feel about father of modern electrochemistry as a title that a lot of people associate you with?
I don't know where that came from, you know. But as I also tell my students, there are two phases in life as a scientist or as an academician. One is your unappreciated stage, when you're much better than people give you credit for and you're totally unappreciated. And then the overappreciated stage, when you're not as good as everybody is telling you you are, and you're overappreciated. Now, of course, it's much better to be in the second stage, but that's where I am now. Not for long. But, you know, electrochemistry has many fathers, many contributors. Some you know probably, and some you never heard of. And they all made big contributions, or at least sizable contributions to the development. So to put it on me, you know, is, I don't know where that came from, but
well, so I don't really know either, but I would guess it's partially because of the students that you already mentioned. And, you know, I know it's fleeting because you said so, but you wrote the book on it too.
Well, yeah, we wrote books, and that helps. But
yeah.
Again, you know, unless we keep propagating that book, it will go out of print like all the famous books go out of print.
My second last question, I think you've already answered, is to tell us about, you know, your influence or your involvement on the Electrochemical Society. But that's, you know, very clear. Your influence is 3 presidents of the organization. I don't know that anybody has more of an influence than you.
Well, but I mean, I was an editor, an associate editor of the journal. I was, I don't remember what the chair or the president of the Electroorganic division, and would work. So I mean, I actually enjoyed working very much with the within the society, the governance of the society, sort of.
When was that? When were you? So that put you on our board of directors, and
no, I wasn't on the board of directors. I don't know if that wasn't automatic. If you were the president of a division, you were on the board of directors.
No, that's right. Not initially. That's right.
The time I was on, there wasn't. The time I was on, it was the Electroorganic division, and I decided we were going to get biology into it too, because I like biology. So we changed to electroorganic and bioelectrochemistry. And not everybody liked that. But I thought that was really important for the society to get a big biological component, and I still think it is.
Oh, yes.
That bioelectrochemistry should be pushed more. So I did that, and over objections of people who I really respected, I think it was probably the right thing to do.
There's a lot of influence on electrochemistry on the organic and biological side of the house.
No, that's right. And I mean, so we do things, I mean, in fact, with collaborators who really know the biology. I mean, the difficulty with doing biology is you have to know the biology, and it's a complex field, and so you have to have people who can teach you very fast. You can't go into the books and learn it all. But we've done stuff on bacteria, for example. I like to work with bacteria, and you know, understanding how bacteria talk to one another, quorum sensing, how they decide we're going to build a town, get together and really make a biofilm. This is fascinating science, and electrochemistry can certainly contribute. And I think much more than it's being done now. You know, I mean, the whole neurotransmitters, nerves, how the brain works is still unknown, you know, and that's, I think, mostly electrochemical.